So let's bring in our panel, Dana Perino, Shannon Bream, Harold Ford Jr., and Charlie Hurt. Great to have all of you with us as we look at these results and very significant wins for Democrats tonight, Dana.
So my partner in crime over there, Bill Hemmer, mentioned the polling, and I think that's going to be one of the threads that people are going to want to pull after this, because the polling did suggest much tighter races. That is not what happened. But you know what was undefeated, and I'm sure Britt Hume will talk about this, and that is the betting markets. And so I think that the whole polling industry has to take a look and say, with these phones, with the new ways to do it, what do we don't have a handle on? I do think that to the extent that there was any story at all is a little bit of a surprise. These are blue states. There shouldn't have been much suspense, but I think that because the Democrats are in such disarray, aside from the Democratic Socialists, who appear to be going very strong, the Democrats are going to have a very difficult time. And I know my friend Harold is going to try to say that Zohran Mamdani is not a Democrat.
Well, he's going to start by saying, thanks for having me.
He's going to be so glad to be on the table, but he already said that to me earlier today. But I think it's going to be very difficult from a messaging standpoint. All of the energy is behind Zohran Mamdani. And what I remember something that George Will said, every 20 years or so, people need a controlled experiment in socialism to remind them of why they need adults in charge.
Okay, so picture this. It's election night, November 5th, 2025. Results are coming in from key races across the country. Georgia, Virginia, New York. These are important contests, bellwether elections that everyone's watching to see which way the political winds are blowing. And as the numbers start rolling in, one thing becomes crystal clear. Republicans are losing. Not just losing, getting crushed, defeated in race after race. Districts they thought were safe, seats they expected to hold, all flipping blue. Democrats are winning everywhere. And Donald Trump, he's watching all of this unfold, and he is absolutely melting down. We're talking full-blown rage, furious posts on Truth Social, blaming everyone except himself, attacking the media, attacking his own party, screaming in all caps that it's not his fault, that he wasn't even on the ballot, that the shutdown was the reason Republicans lost, and then, in the same breath, demanding that Senate Republicans end the filibuster, initiate the nuclear option, blow up the rules of the Senate itself if that's what it takes to pass his agenda. Because clearly, the problem isn't Trump, the problem is everyone else. The problem is the system. The problem is Republicans who aren't loyal enough, who aren't willing to do whatever it takes to win. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Senator Shelley Moore Capito, who's been very involved. Thank you, Shelley. Senator James Lankford from one of my favorite states, 77 out of 77. I always say 77 out of 77. Reagan was 56. That was the record. We got every one of them. Thank you, James. And a fantastic friend of mine and an incredible advocate during the election a year ago, Tim Scott. Thank you, Tim. So as you know, we are in the midst of a disastrous Democrat-created government shutdown, and it is Democrat-created, but I don't think they're getting really the blame that they should. That's now officially the longest shutdown in American history.
Can you believe this? The Republican Party is imploding. Trump is having a public meltdown. GOP leaders are pointing fingers at each other. Congressional Republicans are getting exposed by damaging leaks and subpoenas. And Democrats are just sitting back, watching it all happen and racking up win after win. This is wild. This is unprecedented. And it might be the beginning of the end for Trump's grip on the Republican Party. Because here's the thing. You can only lose so many elections before people start asking questions. You can only blame everyone else so many times before people stop buying it. You can only demand absolute loyalty while delivering nothing but chaos and defeat before your own party turns on you. And that's what we're seeing right now. Republicans are starting to break. They're starting to question whether Trump is an asset or a liability. They're starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, following Trump off a cliff isn't the best strategy. And Trump, he can feel it. He can sense that his power is slipping, that his influence is waning, that the party he remade in his image is starting to crack. And he's panicking. He's lashing out. He's demanding loyalty. He's threatening anyone who doesn't fall in line. But it's not working. Because when you keep losing, loyalty only goes so far. So let's talk about it. Let's break down what happened on election night, why Republicans got destroyed, what's being exposed in Congress, and why Trump's meltdown is a sign that his political empire is crumbling. Because trust me, this is a turning point. This is the moment when the Trump era might finally start coming to an end. Now, the election results were brutal for Republicans. Democrats won in Georgia, they won in Virginia, they won in New York. These weren't just narrow victories either. These were decisive wins, clear margins, races that Republicans thought they had locked down, and they lost them all. And the reasons are becoming pretty clear. Voters are tired of the chaos. They're tired of the government shutdowns. They're tired of the constant drama and dysfunction. They're tired of a party that seems more interested in fighting culture wars and defending Trump than actually governing. And so they voted for Democrats. They voted for the party that's promising stability, normalcy, some semblance of functional government, and Republicans got shellacked. Trump's immediate response? Denial and deflection. He posted on True Social, in all caps, Trump was not on the ballot, and the shotgun were the reason Republicans lost elections tonight. Notice what he's doing there. He's distancing himself from the losses. He's saying, don't blame me, I wasn't even running. But at the same time, he's admitting that his shutdown strategy, the government shutdown he engineered and championed, is exactly why Republicans lost. So which is it, Donald? Are you responsible or not? Because you can't have it both ways. You can't take credit when things go well and then claim you had nothing to do with it when things go badly. But that's exactly what Trump does. That's always been his playbook, and it's starting to wear thin, even among Republicans, even among people who have been loyal to him for years. Because at some point, you have to deliver wins. You have to show that your strategy works. You have to prove that following you leads to success. And Trump can't do that anymore. He's delivering losses. He's delivering chaos. He's delivering dysfunction. And Republicans are starting to notice. But Trump's not just deflecting blame. He's also making demands. According to multiple reports, Trump has been ordering Republican leaders to end the filibuster and initiate the nuclear option in the Senate. For those who don't know, the filibuster is a Senate rule that requires 60 votes to pass most legislation. It gives the minority party some power to block things. And the nuclear option is when you change the rules to eliminate the filibuster. So you only need a simple majority. Trump wants Republicans to blow up the Senate rules to eliminate one of the key checks and balances in our system. Why? So he can pass his agenda without having to compromise or negotiate or build bipartisan support. He wants absolute power. He wants to ram through whatever he wants without any opposition. And he's demanding that Republicans give him that power, even after they just lost a bunch of elections, even as their strategy is clearly failing. Trump's solution is more Trump, more authoritarianism, more rule breaking, more chaos. And some Republicans are starting to say, yeah, maybe that's not the answer. Maybe doubling down on the strategy that's causing us to lose isn't the smart move. So yeah, this is the story. Trump melting down after devastating GOP losses, Republicans getting exposed and fighting among themselves, a party in crisis, a leader whose grip on power is slipping, and an electorate that's clearly had enough. Let's break it down. All right, so let's dig into what actually happened and why it matters so much. Because the election results on November 5th weren't just random losses, they were a clear repudiation of Trump's approach, of his shutdown strategy, and of the direction he's taken the Republican Party. And the fallout is exposing just how fractured and dysfunctional the GOP has become under his leadership. Let's start with the election results themselves. Democrats won key races in Georgia, Virginia, and New York. These aren't just any states. Georgia has been a battleground for years now. Virginia is a bellwether for suburban voters. In New York districts, that flip showed Democrats making gains even in areas that lean conservative. And the margins weren't close. These weren't nail-biters decided by a handful of votes. These were clear, decisive victories. Democrats outperformed expectations across the board, and Republicans got crushed. Now, why did this happen? There are a few reasons, and they're all connected to Trump. First, the government shutdown. Trump engineered a shutdown as a negotiating tactic. He thought he could use it to force Democrats to give him what he wants, but it backfired spectacularly. Federal workers weren't getting paid, services were disrupted, the economy took a hit, and voters blamed Republicans. They blamed Trump. And on election night, they made their feelings clear. They voted for Democrats in droves because they're tired of the chaos, they're tired of government dysfunction, they're tired of Trump treating the federal government like a bargaining chip in his political games. Second, there's just general Trump fatigue, the constant drama, the scandals, the attacks on institutions, the authoritarian rhetoric, the meltdowns. After years of this, a lot of voters, including some Republicans, are just exhausted. They want normalcy, they want stability, they want a government that functions, and Trump represents the opposite of all of that. So they're voting for Democrats, not necessarily because they love Democratic policies, but because Democrats represent a return to some kind of sanity and stability. Third, there's the issue of Trump's legal troubles and the investigations. Voters are watching Trump face multiple criminal prosecutions. They're seeing his associates get subpoenaed. They're hearing about corruption and abuse of power. And some voters, especially moderate and independent voters, are deciding that maybe Republicans who defend Trump aren't the people they want representing them. So they're voting for the other side. Now, Trump's response to all of this has been characteristically unhinged. Instead of acknowledging that maybe his strategy isn't working, instead of reconsidering his approach, he's just pointing fingers and making demands. His Truth Social post blaming the shutdown is particularly telling because he's admitting that the shutdown cost Republicans the election, but he's trying to distance himself from responsibility, like the shutdown just happened on its own, like he had nothing to do with it. But everyone knows Trump orchestrated the shutdown. He bragged about it. He said he'd be proud to shut down the government. He made it central to his political strategy, and now that it's cost Republicans elections, he's trying to pretend it wasn't his fault. That's not leadership. That's cowardice. That's someone who can't take responsibility for his own failures, and Republicans are noticing. There are reports coming out of Washington about growing frustration within the GOP, about Republicans who are privately saying that Trump is a liability, that his approach isn't working, that the party needs to move in a different direction. They're not saying it publicly yet. Most of them are still too afraid of Trump's base to openly break with him. But the cracks are forming, the dissent is growing, and if the losses continue, if Republicans keep getting destroyed in elections because of Trump, eventually that private frustration is going to become public rebellion. But it's not just election losses. Republicans in Congress are also dealing with another major crisis: subpoenas, investigations, exposures of damaging communications. According to reports, the Biden special counsel has issued nearly 200 subpoenas targeting Trump allies and conservative media over January 6th. 200 subpoenas. Think about that. That's not a small investigation. That's a comprehensive effort to uncover what happened, who was involved, and who's responsible. And it's causing panic among congressional Republicans because some of them are implicated. Some of them were involved in the events of January 6th. Some of them have communications that they really don't want becoming public. And now they're facing subpoenas. They're being forced to turn over documents and testify under oath, and they're terrified about what's going to come out. There are demands for Watergate-style hearings. Democrats want public testimony. They want to expose the full extent of what happened on January 6th and in the lead up to it. They want to show the American people that Republican leaders were complicit in an attempt to overturn an election. And Republicans are scrambling to contain the damage. They're attacking the investigation. They're calling it a witch hunt. They're trying to discredit it before the evidence even comes out. But here's the problem. The subpoenas are real, the investigation is happening, and the evidence is going to come out whether Republicans like it or not. And when it does, it's going to be damaging. It's going to expose communications that show coordination, planning, knowledge of what was happening. It's going to implicate Republican members of Congress in serious wrongdoing. And that's going to make the party's crisis even worse. Because it's one thing to lose elections, it's another thing to have your members exposed as participants in an attempted coup. Now, all of this is creating deep rifts within the Republican Party. You've got Trump loyalists who think the answer is to double down, to be even more aggressive, to break even more rules, to follow Trump even harder. And then you've got more traditional Republicans who are looking at the election results and thinking, maybe this isn't working. Maybe we need to move away from Trump. Maybe we need to return to something resembling normal conservatism. And these two factions are at war with each other. They're pointing fingers. They're blaming each other for the losses. They're fighting over the direction of the party. And Trump is demanding loyalty from everyone while delivering nothing but chaos and defeat. Election analysts are calling the November 5th results a sharp rebuke of Trumpism. They're pointing to the party infighting, the strategic failures, the unraveling of unity. They're saying that voters send a clear message that they're tired of Trump's approach. And the question now is whether Republicans will listen to that message or whether they'll keep following Trump off a cliff. Trump's demand that Republicans end the filibuster and initiate the nuclear option is particularly revealing because it shows that his solution to losing is to grab more power, to eliminate checks and balances, to make it so he doesn't need to compromise or build consensus. He just wants to be able to ram through whatever he wants with no opposition. That's not democracy. That's authoritarianism. And some Republicans are starting to recognize that. They're starting to realize that Trump doesn't care about the party. He doesn't care about conservative principles. He doesn't care about governing effectively. He only cares about himself, about his power, about his ego, and following him is destroying the Republican Party. Now, whether enough Republicans will break with Trump to actually change course, that's still an open question, because Trump still has a hold on a significant portion of the Republican base. His supporters are loyal, they're passionate, and they punish anyone who goes against Trump. So Republican politicians are scared. They're scared of being primary. They're scared of losing Trump's endorsement. They're scared of the backlash from his base. But at some point, fear of losing elections to Democrats has to outweigh fear of Trump's base. At some point, the survival instinct has to kick in, and we might be approaching that point. Because if Republicans keep losing elections, if they keep getting destroyed at the ballot box because of Trump, then following him becomes political suicide. And politicians, above all else, want to survive. They want to win. They want to keep their jobs. And if Trump is preventing them from doing that, if he's leading them to defeat after defeat, then eventually they're going to turn on him. Maybe not publicly at first, maybe not all at once, but the cracks are forming. The dissent is growing. And Trump's meltdown, his desperate attempts to shift blame and demand loyalty and grab more power, those are all signs that he knows his grip is slipping. He can feel the ground shifting under his feet, and he's panicking. So yeah, this is where we are. Trump melting down after devastating losses. Republicans getting exposed and fighting among themselves. A party in crisis. A leader whose power is crumbling. And an open question about whether the Republican Party can survive Trump or whether it's going to destroy itself trying to follow him. Let's talk about what happens next. Okay, so let's break down what all of this means going forward, because we're at a critical moment for the Republican Party and for American politics. Trump's meltdown and the GOP's exposure in Congress aren't just isolated incidents. They're symptoms of a party that's deeply broken, that's lost its way, and that's facing an existential crisis about its future. And the decisions Republicans make in the coming weeks and months are going to determine whether the party survives, whether it reforms, or whether it continues its descent into chaos and irrelevance. First, let's talk about Trump's political future, because the November 5th losses are a big deal. They're evidence that Trump's approach isn't working anymore, that his brand of politics is turning off voters, that his chaos and dysfunction are electoral liabilities. And politicians pay attention to election results. When you keep losing, people stop following you. They stop listening to you. They start looking for alternatives. And that's what's starting to happen with Trump. You're seeing more Republicans, quietly at first, questioning whether Trump should be the face of the party, whether he should be the leader, whether following him is the right strategy. Now, Trump still has significant support among the Republican base. His core supporters are loyal. They believe in him. They'll follow him no matter what. But that core base isn't enough to win general elections. You need independents. You need suburban voters. You need moderates. And those voters are fleeing from Trump. They're voting for Democrats in droves because they're tired of the chaos. So Trump is in a tough spot. He can't win without his base. But his base isn't big enough to win on its own. And the more he caters to his base, the more he alienates everyone else. It's a death spiral. And we're watching it happen in real time. Now, Trump's demand that Republicans end the filibuster is particularly telling because it shows that he knows he's losing. He knows his agenda is failing. And his solution is to grab more power, to eliminate the rules that constrain him, to create a system where he can do whatever he wants without opposition. But here's the problem. Even if Republicans were willing to do that, even if they eliminated the filibuster, it wouldn't solve Trump's fundamental problem, which is that voters don't want what he's selling. They don't want chaos. They don't want dysfunction. They don't want authoritarianism. And changing Senate rules doesn't change that. It just makes Republicans look more desperate and more willing to break democratic norms to hold on to power. And that's only going to hurt them more with the voters they need to win. Second, let's talk about the investigations and the subpoenas, because the exposure of Republican communications related to January 6th is going to be a major story for months to come. Nearly 200 subpoenas means there's going to be a steady drip of damaging information coming out. Documents that show what Republican members of Congress knew, communications that reveal their involvement, evidence that contradicts their public statements. And every time a new piece of evidence comes out, it's going to be a news cycle. Democrats are going to hold hearings. They're going to put witnesses on the stand. They're going to create made-for-TV moments that highlight Republican wrongdoing. And Republicans are going to be on defense, constantly explaining, constantly spinning, constantly trying to minimize the damage. And that's going to make their political problems even worse, because voters don't like corruption. They don't like politicians who lie to them. They don't like leaders who were complicit in trying to overturn an election. And the more evidence that comes out, the harder it's going to be for Republicans to defend themselves. Now, Republicans are trying to fight back. They're calling the investigations politically motivated. They're accusing Democrats of conducting a witch hunt. They're demanding their own investigations into Democratic wrongdoing. But that strategy only works if the evidence is ambiguous, if there's room for interpretation, if you can make a credible case that this is all just partisan politics. But if the evidence is clear, if there are documents and recordings and testimony that prove wrongdoing, then all the spin in the world isn't going to save you. And from what we're hearing, the evidence is pretty damning. There are communications that show Republican members of Congress were aware of plans to disrupt the certification of the election. There are records of meetings and phone calls. There are text messages, and all of it is going to come out. And when it does, it's going to be devastating for the Republicans involved. Some of them might face criminal charges. Some of them might be expelled from Congress. Some of them might just lose their next elections. But all of them are going to be damaged. And the Republican Party as a whole is going to be damaged by association. Third, let's talk about the civil war within the Republican Party, because that's what's happening right now. You've got Trump loyalists fighting with traditional Republicans. You've got MAGA hardliners fighting with moderates. You've got different factions all blaming each other for the election losses and all pushing different strategies for the future. And this internal fighting is only making things worse. Because when you're fighting among yourselves, you can't present a unified message to voters. You can't effectively campaign against Democrats. You can't govern effectively if you do manage to win. You're just tearing each other apart while Democrats sit back and watch and win elections. Now, some Republicans are calling for a change in leadership. They're saying that the party needs new direction, that it needs to move beyond Trump, that it needs to return to traditional conservative principles and away from the chaos and authoritarianism of the Trump era. But Trump isn't going anywhere quietly. He's demanding loyalty. He's threatening to primary anyone who goes against him. He's using his influence with the base to keep Republicans in line. And so you've got this standoff where a lot of Republicans know that Trump is leading them to disaster, but they're too afraid to do anything about it. They're hoping someone else will take the lead. They're hoping Trump will just fade away on his own. But Trump doesn't fade away. He doubles down. He gets louder. He demands more loyalty. And the cycle continues. Eventually, something has to break. Either Trump's grip on the party breaks and Republicans find a way to move beyond him, or the party itself breaks and splits into factions, or Republicans just keep losing elections until they're relegated to permanent minority status. Those are basically the three options. And right now, it's not clear which way things are going to go. Fourth, let's talk about what this means for Democrats, because they're in a great position right now. They're winning elections. They're watching Republicans tear themselves apart. They're investigating and exposing Republican wrongdoing, and they're positioning themselves as the party of stability and normalcy. Now, Democrats have their own challenges. They have their own internal divisions. They have policy debates and strategic disagreements. But compared to what's happening with Republicans, Democratic problems look pretty minor, and Democrats are smart enough to capitalize on Republican chaos. They're running ads highlighting Trump's meltdowns. They're pointing to the election losses. They're talking about the investigations and the subpoenas. They're making the case that Republicans are too chaotic and too corrupt to be trusted with power, and it's working. Voters are listening. They're voting for Democrats. They're giving Democrats victories in key races, and that's building momentum heading into 2026 and beyond. If Republicans can't get their act together, if they can't move beyond Trump and his chaos, then Democrats are going to keep winning. They're going to expand their majorities. They're going to control more state legislatures and governorships. They're going to dominate the political landscape. And that's an existential threat to the Republican Party. So what happens next? Honestly, it depends on whether Republicans can find the courage to break with Trump, whether they can prioritize the party's future over fear of his base, whether they can rebuild around principles and policies instead of personality and grievance. If they can do that, if they can move beyond Trump, then maybe the party survives, maybe it reforms, maybe it becomes competitive again. But if they can't, if they keep following Trump down this path of chaos and defeat, then the Republican Party as we know it is finished. It'll either fade into irrelevance or it'll split apart completely, and American politics will be transformed. Now, Trump's meltdown is a sign that he knows all of this. He can see his power slipping. He can feel the ground shifting, and he's desperate. He's lashing out. He's making impossible demands. He's trying to hold on to control by any means necessary. But desperation isn't strength, and Republicans are starting to see that. They're starting to realize that Trump isn't leading them to victory. He's leading them to destruction. And the question is whether they'll do something about it before it's too late. My guess, some will. Some Republicans will break with Trump. Some will try to chart a different course, but it won't be enough. Not yet, because Trump still has too much influence. Too many Republicans are still too afraid of him. So we're probably going to see more losses, more chaos, more meltdowns, more investigations, more exposure, and eventually, maybe after 2026, maybe after another devastating election cycle, Republicans will finally have had enough. They'll finally be willing to move beyond Trump. But by then, the damage might be irreparable. The party might be so broken, so discredited, that rebuilding becomes almost impossible. So yeah, this is a critical moment. Trump is melting down. Republicans are getting exposed. The party is in crisis. And the decisions made in the coming months are going to shape American politics for a generation. Will Republicans find the courage to save themselves, or will they follow Trump all the way to the bottom? We're about to find out. And honestly, based on what we're seeing right now, it's not looking good for the GOP. The meltdown is real. The exposure is happening, and the losses keep piling up. Trump's empire is crumbling, and he's taking the Republican Party down with him. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over.